Good morning, dear students of class 12. Once again, and for the upteenth time, let us take up the short story To Build a Fire, written by Jack London. And today is the last video on this short story, the fourth video, and I expect all of you to sit and listen carefully as I read out the text and try to explain it to you, and also understand what happens finally at the end of the story. So let's begin. So we continue from the end of page 47. We had stopped at the sentence that finished on the last line. The withdrawal of blood from the surface of his body now made him begin to shiver, and he grew more awkward. So we continue. A large piece of green moss fell squarely on the little fire. He tried to poke it out with his fingers, but his shivering frame made him poke too far, and he disrupted the nucleus of the little fire. Nucleus means the very center of the little fire that he was able to make the second time. Now, if you disturb the very center of the fire, then what happens? Naturally, the fire will go out, and that is what is now going to happen. The burning grasses and tiny twigs separating and scattering. So when he did this is what happened. He tried to poke them together again, but in spite of the tenseness of the effort, his shivering got away with him, and the twigs were hopelessly scattered. Each twig gushed a puff of smoke and went out. So unfortunately, when he was trying to take out the green piece of moss which accidentally fell into the fire, what happened was it fell right into the middle of the fire, and as he tried to poke it out, he actually spoilt the fire. And what happened? It started going out. Which means this is the indication of the fact that his doom is already sealed by providence. His luck is not on his side, and this man is now destined to freeze to death. So, this is what happened. The fire provider had failed. As he looked apathetically about him, his eyes chanced on the dog, sitting across the ruins of the fire from him, in the snow, making restless, hunching movements, slightly lifting one forefoot and then the other, shifting its weight back and forth on them with wistful eagerness. The dog can sense something. The dog, its instinct tells it to be ready for any situation, and that is why this is said to be the behavior of the dog. Now the man is looking at the dog. His intentions are not good. When he realizes that his fingers have no sensation in them, and that making the fire is not possible anymore because he has exhausted all his matchsticks, now his attention turns towards the husky which was following him. It's another life. It has its bodily warmth. So the man has an evil plan in his mind. The sight of the dog put a wild idea into his head. He remembered the tale of the man caught in a blizzard. What is a blizzard? A blizzard is a snowstorm. Just like we have storms, normal storms, ordinary storms followed by rainfall or together with the rain, similarly in cold regions of the world, they have blizzards sometimes. So it's even more dangerous because the blizzard brings loads of snow and ice, and it can cause a person to freeze to death. So he remembered the story of a man who was caught in a blizzard, who killed a steer and crawled inside the carcass. So this man, he managed to kill an animal, and after killing the animal, he crawled inside the dead body of the animal. That means he took out the intestines after killing the animal, ripped its abdomen open with the knife, removed the intestines and all other internal organs, and then the hollow that was created, he got inside that and he managed to survive, making use of the protective outer body, the flesh, the skin, the fur of the animal against the blizzard. So this is what the man is thinking about now. If he can get hold of the dog, his plan is to kill the dog, and a husky is generally a big dog, and then his plan is to, even if he is not able to crawl inside fully, he has some plans of putting his hands and legs at least inside, or somehow to regain the warmth in his fingers and his feet by making use of the dead dog's body temperature and also the covering of the dead dog's body. So this is what he is planning to do. And so was saved. That man had killed a steer and crawled inside the carcass, and so was saved. He would kill the dog and bury his hands in the warm body until the numbness went out of them. Then he could build another fire. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, but in his voice was a strange note of fear that frightened the animal. Animals, they know, their instincts tell them. And so this dog was aware of the fact that this man was probably calling it with some bad intention. Animals know. So that is what happened to the dog. It got frightened. He had never known the man speak in such a way before. Something was the matter, and its suspicious nature sensed danger. It knew not what danger, but somewhere, somehow, in its brain arose an apprehension of the man. It flattened its ears down at the sound of the man's voice, and its restless hunching movements and the liftings and shiftings of its forefeet became more pronounced. But it would not come to the man. He got on his hands and knees and crawled toward the dog. This unusual posture again excited suspicion, and the animal sidled mincingly away. So the more the man was trying to become friendly with the dog and trying to come near it, the more the dog was trying to move away from the man. The man sat up in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens by means of his teeth and got upon his feet. He glanced down at first in order to assure himself that he was really standing up, because by now all sensation in his feet and his legs was probably gone. So that is why he looked down to check whether he was really standing up. For the absence of sensation in his feet left him unrelated to the earth. So the body, the rest of the body of the man did not seem to feel the connection which he had with the ground under his feet, because his feet had gone absolutely numb. His erect position in itself started to drive the webs of suspicion from the dog's mind, and when he spoke peremptorily with the sound of whiplashes in his voice, the dog rendered, and we have come to the end of page 48, the dog rendered its customary allegiance and came to him. So the dog also knows from the symptoms or the body language of the man whether the man is alright or whether the man has some other intentions. So now that the man was standing up and was calling out to the dog, just like he used to order it earlier, the dog responded and it came within reaching distance. The man lost his control. His arms flashed out to the dog, and he experienced a genuine surprise when he discovered that his hands could not clutch, that there was neither bend nor feeling in the fingers. He had forgotten for the moment that they were frozen and that they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could get away, he encircled its body with his arms. He sat down in the snow and in this fashion held the dog, while it snarled and whined and struggled. Now, the animal, as I told you, is not the pet of this man. So, naturally, if the man is grabbing hold of it and is trying to hold it like that, the animal is not liking it and wants to be free. Do you think at this stage the man has the capacity to use a knife to kill the dog? Impossible, because his fingers are not responding to him. He cannot clutch, he cannot bend his fingers. Then how will he strangle the dog? How will he kill the dog? How will he even hold a knife? So even though he's thinking, but in practice it is next to impossible. But it was all he could do. Hold its body encircled in his arms and sit there. He realized that he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his helpless hands, he could neither draw nor hold his sheath knife nor throttle the animal. He realized it. He knew that it was not possible for him to kill the dog. So he released it and it plunged wildly away. And the moment he let the dog go, it tried to move away from the man as fast as it could, with tail between its legs and still snarling, showing its teeth. The dog was disappointed, it was angry. It halted 40 feet away and surveyed him curiously. 40 feet is quite a distance from the man. With ears sharply pricked forward, the man looked down at his hands in order to locate them and found them hanging on the ends of his arms. It struck him as curious that one should have to use his eyes in order to find out where his hands were. He began threshing his arms back and forth, beating the mittened hands against the sides, the same thing that he did earlier. Hopelessly, in a desperate attempt, once again trying to get back some sensation in his fingers. He did this for 5 minutes, violently, and his heart pumped enough blood up to the surface to put a stop to his shivering. But no sensation was aroused in the hands. He had an impression that they hung like weights on the ends of his arms. But when he tried to run the impression down, he could not find it. So completely, now his hands are completely frozen, therefore they are just hanging like weights at the end of his arms. He cannot feel them even after he tried in vain to hit them against his body again and again to get some sensation back. A certain fear of death, dull and oppressive, came to him. This fear quickly became poignant as he realized that it was no longer a mere matter of freezing his fingers and toes or of losing his hands and feet, but that it was a matter of life and death with the chances against him. So he realized it, that it's no longer the question of whether he should lose his hands and feet. It was the question of whether he would be losing his life, and that was the probability. He was moving towards it. He would soon be losing his life. This threw him into a panic, and he turned and ran up the creek bed along the old dim trail. The dog joined in behind and kept up with him. He ran blindly, without intention, in fear such as he had never known in his life. Slowly, as he plowed and floundered through the snow, he began to see things again. The banks of the creek, the old timber jams, the leafless aspens. We have come to the end of page 49, and the sky. The running made him feel better. He did not shiver. Maybe if he ran on, his feet would thaw out. And anyway, if he ran far enough, he would reach camp and the boys. This is what he was thinking. But no, it won't be possible because the distance was still too great and he was already in a very bad shape. Without doubt, he would lose some fingers and toes and some of his face. But the boys would take care of him and save the rest of him when he got there. And at the same time, there was another thought in his mind that said he would never get to the camp and the boys. So the second thought is that he will not make it. That it was too many miles away, that the freezing had too great a start on him, and that he would soon be stiff and dead. This thought he kept in the background and refused to consider. He is aware of it, but he does not want to accept it. He does not want to even think about it, though he is thinking about it. Sometimes it pushed itself forward and demanded to be heard. This thought sometimes wanted to reign supreme on his mind, that you are going to die, you are destined to be dead. He is trying to push it aside, but he is not able to do that. But he thrust it back and strove to think of other things. He tried to divert his mind, not to think about death, but to think about something else. Then the situation is not in his favor at all. So just imagine how Jack London writes this. A man who is destined to die and is able to realize that he is going to die and is dying bit by bit with this realization. What a tragic situation for this man. It struck him as curious that he could run at all on feet, so frozen that he could not feel them when they struck the earth and took the weight of his body. He seemed to himself to skim along above the surface and to have no connection with the earth. Somewhere he had once seen a winged Mercury, and he wondered if Mercury felt as he felt when skimming over the earth. So, this is what he's thinking about. Now, the winged Mercury, I will give you the reference in the class WhatsApp group so that you can go through. His theory of running until he reached camp and the boys had one flaw in it, had one mistake in it. The theory of reaching the camp, there was a mistake in his theory. He lacked the endurance. He did not have the capacity to continue in that manner. Several times he stumbled and finally he tottered, crumpled up and fell. When he tried to rise, he failed. He must sit and rest, he decided. And next time he would merely walk and keep on going. As he sat and regained his breath, he noted that he was feeling quite warm and comfortable. Now that was because of the fact that he had been running. He was not shivering, and it even seemed that a warm glow had come to his chest and trunk. That means his upper body. And yet, when he touched his nose or cheeks, there was no sensation. Running would not thaw them out, nor would it thaw out his hands and feet. Because when you are running, the body is undergoing exercise, but the hands and feet are still frozen. Then the thought came to him that the frozen portions of his body must be extending. He tried to keep his thought down, to forget it. That means the frozen portions of his body, that is undergoing an extension, means more and more areas of his body are now freezing up. But he did not want to think about it. He tried to think about something else. He was aware of the panicky feeling that it caused, and he was afraid of the panic. But the thought asserted itself and persisted. The thought simply wouldn't go away. It went on occurring and coming back in his mind again and again, or recurring in his mind again and again, until it produced a vision of his body totally frozen. So he was already imagining that he is totally frozen. This was too much. And so we have reached the end of page 50. So he made another wild run along the trail. Once he slowed down to a walk, but the thought of the freezing extending itself made him run again. He was now in great panic that if he stops, he will freeze to death. So he must keep running. And all the time, the dog ran with him at his heels. When he fell down a second time, it curled its tail over its 4 feet and sat in front of him, facing him, curiously eager and intent. The dog is like Providence, watching how this man is dying little by little, bit by bit, observing every move that the man is making. The warmth and security of the animal angered him. The man was angry that this animal could be so comfortable despite such odd weather condition. And he cursed it till it flattened down its ears appeasingly. This time the shivering came more quickly upon the man. He was losing in his battle with the frost. The terrible frost in the air was now gripping him all the more. It was creeping into his body from all sides. The thought of it drove him on, but he ran no more than 100 feet. When he staggered and pitched headlong, it was his last panic, meaning to say, he is about to die. When he had recovered his breath and control, he sat up and entertained in his mind the conception of meeting death with dignity. Now he is considering accepting death with dignity. However, the conception did not come to him in such terms. His idea of it was that he had been making a fool of himself, running around like a chicken with its head cut off. So just as a chicken would run around for a while even if its head is cut off, thinking that by running it can save its life, the same was happening with this man. He was able to realize that death is inevitable, that it's useless to keep running and thinking that he will be saved, he will be able to reach the camp where his friends would be taking care of him. It's not possible. So, such was the simile that occurred to him. Well, he was bound to freeze anyway, and he might as well take it decently. With this newfound peace of mind, so when you are sure of the fact that you are going to die, then you come to terms with yourself that okay, this is inevitable, this is going to happen. So he comes to terms with his own mind. Came the first glimmerings of drowsiness, the very first sensation of feeling drowsy. Now his brain, his mind, his brain is also getting affected because of the cold. A good idea, he thought, to sleep off to death. It's a good idea. If I am feeling drowsy, let me fall off to sleep. Let me give in to this drowsiness rather than trying to shake it off, and let me freeze to death while I sleep. Because dying in your sleep is the most peaceful way to die. It was like taking an anesthetic. Freezing was not so bad as people thought. There were lots worse ways to die. So, freezing was not so bad. This is what he's telling himself. He pictured the boys finding his body next day. Suddenly he found himself with them, coming along the trail and looking for himself. What is happening actually? Actually, his thoughts are making him hallucinate. He is seeing his friends near him. It's not true. He's actually dead, or is about to be completely dead. And still with them, he came around a turn in the trail and found himself lying in the snow. He sees himself lying in the snow. His soul has left his body. He is with his friends, and he is seeing his dead body lying in front of him. His friends cannot see him. His soul is actually with his friends. They have discovered his body. He did not belong with himself anymore, for even then he was out of himself, standing with the boys and looking at himself in the snow. It certainly was cold, was his thought. When he got back to the States, he could tell the folks what real cold was. He drifted on from this to a vision of the old timer on Sulphur Creek. He could see him quite clearly, warm and comfortable and smoking a pipe. You were right, old hoss. It's a slang for horse. You were right, the man mumbled to the old timer of Sulphur Creek. All this is what his soul is doing, what his mind is doing. He is not alive anymore. We have finished with page 51. We have come to the last page of the story and the last portion of the story, the last paragraph perhaps of the story. Then the man drowsed off into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day drew to a close in a long, slow twilight. It's evening. The man is dead. The dog is waiting at a distance, sitting on the snow, if the man gets up. But the man will never get up. There were no signs of a fire to be made, and besides, never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the twilight drew on, its eager yearning for the fire mastered it, and with a great lifting and shifting of its forefeet, it whined softly, then flattened its ears down in anticipation of being chidden by the man. The dog was thinking that the man will suddenly speak to it and will scold it. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog whined loudly, and still later, it crept close to the man and caught the scent of death. So, when the man did not move for a pretty long time, few hours have actually gone by, the dog finally mustered courage to come up to the man to sniff. And as we know, dogs and all animals in general, they sniff and make out things. So the dog could catch the scent of death. This made the animal bristle and back away. Bristle means its hair, its fur, stood up erect on its body when the dog realized that the man was actually dead. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew, where were the other food providers and fire providers. Because we know that based on its instinct, the dog would always be near human beings and would always be near human beings because human beings provide food and human beings provide the warmth of fire. So the dog left the body of the dead man and went on its journey to the camp, the same camp where this man wanted to go. The dog leaves the sea, and the story comes to an end. A tragic tale that ends with the death of the chief protagonist, that is, the man whose name remains unmentioned in the story. We have finished page 52, and here on your screen once again you can see Jack London's To Build a Fire, the poster of the film, which you can find on Netflix or in YouTube, and this is the cast of the film. So if possible, watch this film. This is the poster, informative poster.